Hey guys, I just want to show you guys my deck profile that I had for this channel. This is going to be my first video for Lorcana TCG IRL. So to start off, we have Captain Hook. I play this in particular because it's really good if my opponent charges something into the inkwell, or when they do that, I know what deck they're on, or if they're playing yellow, green, or red. Those are typically the cards that you want to have Captain Hook have out on the first turn. If I go second, that's the advantage that I have. But if I don't know what I'm playing against and I'm going first, I typically will not place him into my inkwell because I want to know what my opponent is playing, what color that my opponent is playing before I decide to put him in the inkwell. So I do play 4 copies. It's really good even in the late game because Captain Hook will be able to swing for 3 damage every single time he swings. However, that's only the challenger ability. When he actually challenges, when he gets challenged, he's only a 1-2, and I find that really weak. So oftentimes I'll leave him out in active mode so that he doesn't get hurt by any sort of attacks against green, red, or yellow. And when they finally exert their characters to quest, I often use Captain Hooks to go after those guys so that I have a favorable trade. And oftentimes those guys are often 1/1s that quest for 2, and this is a really good card against those matchups. Dr. Fassler, I only play 2 copies, namely because he only has the Challenger ability, but he has a really high stat of 4 health, and that 4 health will allow me to survive. Allow him to survive a lot of damages, so that it makes them so that they force the attack on him to retaliate because he's only hitting back for 0. Only when he challenges is he a very legitimate threat. I also play Prince Eric. Prince Eric's a really good card because he's similar to Captain Hook in that I often leave him in active mode, and by leaving him in active mode and unexerted, everybody who's playing yellow, red, or green has to consider whether or not they want to quest for lore, or they leave him in active mode until they can deal with him. And that gives me just enough time to be able to ramp into a more ink so that I can play my bigger threats in this game. So that's kind of the idea behind this deck, is that I control the early game by not swinging with these 2 or these 3, and then when they actually play somebody, they're always cautious to quest because they know that they'll lose it. A lot of decks, especially purple, play the Pasquale. Pasquale is one of those cards with evasive, and that evasiveness of that card is often only granted if they have another character on board. So oftentimes I will develop my units first, and then when they swing with Pasquale and then they play a unit on turn 2, I'll often back up the unit with Fire the Cannons or Smash, and these 2 cards will allow me to remove that character, and Pasquale will lose its evasiveness and trade favorably with Prince Eric, Dr. Fassler, or Captain Hook on Pasquale. So that's kind of the idea, is that I use removal to kind of trick my opponent into developing with Pasquale, and then I basically play another unit, play Fire the Cannon, take out their unit, and Pasquale loses evasiveness, and then I can go after them. That's just to reiterate. My 3 drops are really tight on space, so I definitely play Maleficent because she's able to draw you a card in the late game so that you can draw into your threats. Your threats in this deck is going to be Dr. Fassler, Simba, and Elsa, and Tinkerbell. So these are your 4 threats, but even in the mid game to late game, you're also going to be able to draw into things like Plasma Blaster, which I've been trying out and teching. It's a really good card in the mid to late game because you can just pay the 2 ink to do 1 damage every turn. So this allows me to use Fire the Cannons more favorably and Smash more favorably, whereas if I didn't have Plasma Blaster, I would often be wasting 2 Fire the Cannons to clear a 4-drop. Whereas if I have a Plasma Blaster, I could Plasma Blaster at 1 turn, and then the next turn Plasma Blaster it again, and then fire the cannons. So this allows me to take out the 4 drops really efficiently. Same with Smash. If I'm staring down a 4 health character, and there's many of those in the game, or a 3 health character, I can use Plasma Blaster to take him down to 2 and then fire the cannons. If I'm dealing with a 4 health character, I'll deal 1 damage to that 4 health character and then use Smash on it. So the Plasma Blaster just helps a lot. I'm even thinking about taking or playing this card to 4 copies because it's just that good. The only downside of this is that it can't be inked into the inkwell. It has to be used or discarded somehow. So that's what I'm kind of hesitant to add more of the inkless the Inkwellis cards, because I play so many in this deck already. I play 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 8, 12, 14, and 18. So that's kind of a lot of different cards I cannot use into the Inkwell. So I'm very careful about playing too many copies of more Plasma Blaster for that reason. So yeah, so this is definitely a removal deck. And towards the later game, I try to finish the game off with Dr. Fassler because he does quests for three lores, as does Elsa. Elsa does it a little bit differently, where oftentimes if my opponent has two big threats on the board, Elsa can just play herself, lock them down, and this way that on the next turn, if I do have a full board, I can just quest for 3 along with the full board and then put them on lethal range, where they have to trade their big units into my smaller units to prevent themselves from losing the game. In addition to the Plasma Blaster and the Fire the Cannons and Smash, I do play Hans. Hans is a really good card in this deck, namely because if he does quest, he does deal 1 damage to any character, even if it's in active mode. And because of that, Hans really complements the Steel package, where I'm able to remove evasive characters on the board so that I don't have to worry about losing the game to those type of characters. So evasive characters are definitely the bane of this deck, which is why I also play Simba, because he's able to have evasive on my turn and be able to clear evasive units that are exerted. So that's definitely a reason why I play Simba. Another reason why I play Simba is because he's often hitting for 8 damage, and a lot of big units, such as Tomatoa, which is the crab that gains a lore counter for every single time, or for every single item that you have on the board. He has a health of 8, and it's really hard for this deck to deal with high health units, because there's no removal like Dragonfire in this deck, or Hades, or Let It Go. I often have to supplement my damage using Simba and Challengers to be able to take that down, and using the remainder of my ink to be able to deal with it using Fire the Cannon and Smash. So it has a really hard time dealing with high health units, so that is why I play Simba. And Dr. Fassler, I think a lot of you guys know the benefits of this. It's able to trade my smaller units really efficiently, and then they go back to my hand. And oftentimes, if they go back to my hand, I'll either place it in the inkwell, because they often do have the ability to go into my inkwell, or I can reestablish my board so that I can do more damage. So this is generating me a lot of +1s just by it being out there, and oftentimes my opponent will remove this Dr. Fassler from the board using Let It Go, Dragonfire, and even Be Prepared. Be Prepared is the dark hole of the red color. In addition, I play Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell is another form of removal along with the Hans package that allows me to do 1 damage to everybody. So in essence, I'm able to remove a lot of my opponent's characters in active mode just by using Tinkerbell and Plasma Blaster, as well as Grab Your Sword, and also the Fire the Cannons that can be looped around with the Captain Hook. Captain Hook, when it is played, you get to recycle your Fire the Cannons. So during the mulligan phase, if I open up Captain Hook but no Fire the Cannons, I will often mulligan away my Captain Hook, because it's pointless to have Captain Hook in my hand if I do not have the way of recycling Fire the Cannons. So I will most likely be mulliganing for the Fire the Cannons in my opening hand, because it's live as soon as turn 1. Do Tech 2 Beast in this deck. Beast is really good because it's able to remove really good items from my opponent's side. Really good items include Beast Mirror, Magic Mirror, and also the Ursula's Secret Necklace, I believe it's called. Those are all cards that I do not want on the board, because it's going to generate them advantage over time. And I'm going to be I want to be the deck that controls better than my opponent does, which is why I tech the Beast to be able to deal with those items. And then the real star of the show, and I failed to mention this early on to my deck profile, is the Queen. The Queen is a really good draw power. It's a really good draw engine. When she's on the board, she has an impressive stat line of 4-5, so her having a health of 5 health makes it really difficult for them to remove her. And so oftentimes I'll either use her to trade favorably into my opponent's units, or I'll use her to quest, or I'll use her to draw a card. And oftentimes this deck struggles to draw later in the game to my boss characters. So the Queen helps me get to that, while also being a threat to my opponent, because they're going to waste removal on her, or hope to draw into removal. And by the time they waste the removal on her, In theory, I'll be able to play things like Tinkerbell, Dr. Flassler, Simba, and Elsa to finish the game as quickly as possible. But Hans is also a really good card to draw into as well in the late game. So I have a lot of things that quest for 2 lures, as well as things that quest for 3. I used to play Elsa, the 3-drop, but I found in testing over time that she was often a negative tempo. What I mean by that is when I play her, she doesn't give me any value on the board right away until the next turn, and her being only a 3 health unit is really susceptible to a lot of different removals, and I didn't like that, so I decided to cut her completely for Wardrobe. Wardrobe has an amazing stat line of 3 and 4, but not only that, being able to be a 3 cost allows me to play things like Friends on the Other Side to allow me to draw 2 cards without spending any ink, and that's really important because I want to be able to have a high health unit in Exert to be able to draw cards, and then because of that I don't have to worry about wasting my entire turn, because the draw 2 cards will not waste me my turns, because in Magic the Gathering like games, using mana or using ink to draw cards often makes it so that you have to play subpar characters on the board on the same turn because they're cheaper. But with the sing mechanic in this game, you can rest your guy or you can exert your guy and draw 2 cards, and then still have the ink to be able to play bigger threats such as Hans, Queen, and Beast. Oh yeah, so that's pretty much the deck profile. I really enjoy this deck. I think you guys should definitely play it. It's really fun. It's really good against decks that like to play evasiveness as well as being able to aggro. Its primary weakness in this deck is green, because green has the ward mechanic, which does not allow me to target them by anything except for challenges. So you're going to have a hard time dealing with ward in particular. But the cool thing about this game is that they have to swing in order to get their lore. And if they're in rest mode, you can often deal with them in rest mode easier because of your units. So yeah, that is the weakness of this deck. It's often green with red, but other decks where you're playing the control game, you're going to be having a much more easier time with those matchups because of the way your deck is functioning. Alright, yeah, so I'm going to do gameplay videos on the next video, but for this video, just definitely take this deck and try it out for yourself. And let me know what you think in the comment section. Alright, peace out guys. Thanks.